request the panelists to come up to the dais.
The Center for Eastern and Northeastern Regional Studies, Kolkata, feels really honored to extend a very warm welcome to all of you present here to today's discussion. It would be befitting to say a few words about this organization because many of you might not have heard the name. The CNSK, in short, is a think tank which was set up in the year 2008. The idea is to take up issues of development, governance and security pertaining to the east and northeastern region of the country, focus attention, deliberate, and from time to time bring its findings and recommendations to the Government of India. The CNSK is run by a governing council which is headed by no other than the former Chief of the Army Staff, General Shankar Roy Chaudhary, who is a former Member of Parliament in Rajya Sabha and happens to be present amidst us today. Other members of this organization hail from different disciplines and backgrounds. Though the CNSK happens to be only 4 years old, it has acquired that audacity of marking its presence, leaving small fingerprints in the hallowed precincts of the Bengal Club, the RCTC, the Tolly Club, the Territorial Army, Fort William, and the Northeastern Council, Shillong. This organization, from time to time, on a regular basis, organizes workshops, seminars, roundtable conferences, and panel discussions like today's evening, inviting experts, political and defense analysts, members of the diplomatic corps, and its stakeholders, which include the state governments, the Government of India, and the Department of Northeastern Region, Government of India. Today's discussion is going to be on a subject which you all know, democracy in India at the crossroads. In brief remarks, I may mention, you'll agree that political system in any country is governed or dictated by the reality of the tradition, history, and customs of the country concerned. But the quality and flavor of democracy is determined by its skills to effect a balance of interest between the community and the people and the government. In 20th century, democracy used to be treated as a political ornament. That ornament only the rich and the developed countries could afford. But today, democracy has become a powerful weapon in the hands of the high and mighty to destabilize adversaries, sparing the friends and allies. In 1900, the world had only about 10 democratic countries. And today, under the umbrella of democracy, you have a congregation of over 120 countries. Interestingly, the countries which have embraced democracy during this period, democracies in countries which have either no oil or little oil. I'd say that God has been very kind and generous giving oil and gas to countries without democracies. Fortunately, the number of autocracies has declined over the years, and today is said to have come down from 62 to 44, maybe less than 44 by now. Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, democracy is not only about holding elections and installing government. Democracy is not about treating electoral victory as a kind of mandate or license or endorsement to rule the people the way and the manner one liked. Democracy is not populism. It is about performance. Democracy is not about patronage. It is about equality. Democracy is not about generosity. It is about entitlement. An elected representative is therefore required to do justice and honor to the oath of office he or she holds. Likewise, member of the electorate has also to do justice to his duties and responsibilities. When India became independent and embraced democracy, showing to the world how to manage differences and diversities through peaceful and democratic and non-violent means, the Western media was agog with obituaries. I call it an avalanche of obituaries. Dark prophecy that with the passage of time, India will crumble into pieces under the weight of its diversities, acute poverty and illiteracy, and India would come under an autocratic rule. You might recall Joseph Stalin had made an observation that how could a country hope and aspire to be a democratic country without even a national language. 1952 general elections was described as the biggest gamble in the history of parliamentary democracy. But when India survived, it was described as a miracle. And the British was quick enough to qualify that this survival was necessary for the stability of the world polity. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we have assembled here today to discuss all these issues and many more, to really examine, is Indian democracy at its crossroads? Has Indian democracy failed to honor what it commits? Indian democracy failed to deliver what it promises? Or is it that the hardware of Indian democracy, with unprecedented freedom of speech, expression, movement, choice and liberty, is outstanding, whereas the software of Indian democracy, comprising political parties, politicians, systems, institutions and market and all those manning these, leaves much to be desired. If Indian democracy has failed, how it failed, who failed, when failed, what failed, and what all we need to do to restore the situation if it is required. And therefore, to discuss all these, we are very fortunate to have before us a very distinguished panel of eminent speakers. Mr. Dinesh Trivedi is the Member of Parliament, former Railway Minister. He had stirred the soul of India when he came out saying that in his discharge of ministerial responsibility, he was listening to his inner voice of conscience. And he always put nation above self and family. His rhetoric had really touched and moved people from different backgrounds on spectrum of social political classes. More so, to put it in lighter vein, it came from a politician. He had his schooling in Simla. He is ex-Xaverian. Did his MBA in Austin from Texas. He is a trained pilot and a keen golfer. And above all, he is said to be an extraordinary man of expression. We have Mr. Sunanda K. Dattore, an erudite scholar and one of the most affable intellectuals. Editor of Statesman for several years. Did his college in Calcutta and Manchester University. He is an essayist in Times Magazine and regular commentators in the International Herald Tribune. His book, Looking East to Look to the West, Lee Kuan Yew's Mission India, received Vodafone Crossword Award in non-fiction category in the year 2009. We have Rudrangshu Mukherjee, we all know as the editor of editorial page of the Telegraph, a presidency alumni, masters from the JNU, DPhil from Edmund Hall, Oxford, reader in Calcutta University, and thereafter taught in the University of Manchester, California, and Princeton. Has authored a number of books on different aspects of politics, of history. He is known as a historian. And last but not the least, we have a moderator, Barrister Jayanta Mitra. He is one of the most eminent barristers in India. He never loses a case, I am told. From presidency in economics, then London School of Economics, and bar at law from Middle Temple. He and his gracious wife asked me not to speak much about him. With these words, ladies and gentlemen, may I request you to welcome all these eminent people on the dais by giving them a very good round of applause. May I now request the moderator to take charge of the proceedings and conduct the show. Thank you. God bless.
The eulogy that was paid by Shamol to me, I don't deserve it. But anyway, today my role is only that of a referee in a very exciting, you may put it, soccer, or perhaps you can say tennis, because the balls will be sent from one court to the other, and it will be for the person, the recipient, to send the ball back. Now, there are some, the rules of the game that I must mention. Each of the panelists will be allotted 15 minutes to have his say. When one panelist is speaking, I will not allow any other panelist to intervene or interrupt, excepting for raising a point of order. After 15 minutes, I don't find either a bell or perhaps a hammer, which is perhaps more, I should be used to. So I will have to thump on the table to stop the speaker. So the speakers, the honorable panelists, please take note. At the end of the discussions, I am supposed to sum up. But I can assure you, after you have heard the speakers, very little will be left for me to sum up. Each of them, I have heard each one of them. Each one of them is a brilliant speaker, so it will hardly need any summing up. But nonetheless, I'll have to justify my existence. So one or two words at the end of it perhaps will be enough. And after that is over, then I shall open the floor for putting questions. And my request will be, when you put the questions, please indicate the speaker from whom you want the answer. If you do not mention the name of the speaker from whom you want the answer, then I shall select the speaker who will answer your question. I think these are all the preliminaries. Now I shall call upon the speakers, the panelists, one by one, to address the gathering. I think the first person that I shall call upon to speak is Mr. Shunanda Dattoray.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Crossroads terrify me. There's a particularly vicious one very near where I live. Ballygan Circular Road debouches into Gadiahat Road. Hazra Road comes up from one side. Bondal Road and Broad Street come from the other. And it's a madhouse of cars, scooters, pedestrians, and the occasional rumbling tram. An old man like me has to cross 4 roads to get across the road, side by side. But not the battered but undaunted scooters that weave in and out of the traffic, that mount the pavement, that ignore the traffic rules, that overtake on the wrong side and always get to the destination, executing U-turns where they shouldn't and turns where they shouldn't either. And that, Mr. Moderator, I would say is the spirit of Indian democracy. It survives, it doesn't collapse, it goes through, it overcomes all hurdles. If we think of Crossroads as a place where democracy collapses, it should have collapsed on the 15th of August 1947. Many of you may be familiar with the incident that when Rajendra Prasad and Jawaharlal Nehru gave a sealed envelope to Lord Mountbatten, the envelope was supposed to contain the list of the first democratic ministers in the first democratic government of India, and Mountbatten opened the envelope and found a sheet of blank paper. He survived it, Indian democracy survived it. But there may be questions as to whether what survived was democracy or not. I am taken back, Mr. Moderator, to a similar seminar that I attended some years ago in Chicago, and Senator Adlai Stevenson III, not the first, not the second, but the third, said to me, "You have representative government in India, we have a democracy." And I pondered on the difference. We are so proud of universal adult suffrage. We are so proud of the fact that we alone in the neighborhood have sustained a parliamentary form of government. But does the vote of a Mukesh Ambani weigh exactly the same as the vote of the sweeper outside in Russell Street? We need something like purchasing power parity to weight our Indian democracy. And the difference is not only between rich and poor, it's caste and community. Even the CPM won't put up a Hindu Brahmin candidate in a Muslim area. And these are the domestic internal considerations that dilute, some would say distort, certainly alter the face of Indian democracy to some extent. Passing through the filtration of India's culture, India's traditions, it is no longer government of the people, for the people, and by the people. It becomes something typically Indian. And that's where it ceases to be democracy in a classical Western sense. This happens to all institutions in a feudal society that is ridden by caste. And that feudalism, the hierarchical sense of Indian society, extends beyond social caste into the bureaucracy, into the polity. You all know the story of an officer who in the Central Secretariat in Delhi, who was installed in a new room, and the next day someone appeared and snipped off 6 inches of his carpet all round. Why? Because he'd been given the room of a higher ranking officer. He wasn't quite entitled to that room. So we have that hierarchy in every aspect of life, and that is where the relationship between man and man, the equal relationship, the fraternity, is mellowed to some extent. Now, for that fraternity, you don't need necessarily the trappings of Western democracy. It can exist in a nation society also. There's a famous story, it's reported to be true, that King Ibn Saud, the founder of Saudi Arabia, when it was a tribal society, before it became an oil-rich, repressive dictatorship, man in the street, a fellahin, addressed King Ibn Saud as "Ya brother." And this American Aramco chief expressed surprise and said, "Your Majesty, he called you brother." And King Ibn Saud said, "Can a man insult me by calling me his mother's son?" That is of the essence of Asian democracy, and if it can survive, well and good. It doesn't often survive. When the Indian Association was being set up in Singapore many years ago, and there was a motion that local Indians should be admitted, and one of the other Indians, the Bhadralok members, said, "Oh no, you don't know, they'll come in half naked." And that's the kind of differentiation that exists in all our social institutions. So when we say, is democracy, when we express the fear, rather, that democracy is at the crossroads, we don't really mean democracy, the essence of democracy, the equality of man and man. We mean the trappings of democracy, the imported trappings of democracy that are unintelligible to the vast majority of the Indian populace. I remember a stirring day at the West Bengal Assembly when the governor had formed a government behind the elected ministry's back, and then that government had to be sworn in. And the Speaker of the Assembly, a good Marxist, Bijon Banerjee, got up and he began with, "Not since Charles I did this to the round parliament has there been ever." And I, sitting in the Speaker's gallery, had taken my mother, I wondered, how many people in this hall have ever heard of Charles I? How many people know of this precedent? I think the only one who did was Siddhartha Shankar Rai, who was looking very surprised and bemused and clutching an enormous Erskine May's parliamentary practice and at the back. These trappings of Western democracy are decaying. And because they're decaying, we think democracy is decaying. Now, our chief minister here has repeatedly, in her parliamentary days, invaded the well of the House. She probably thought the well was a place where you drew water and there was a bucket. And she was surprised why there wasn't that. I regularly hear on Parliament, and I see Meera Kumari, the Speaker, saying, "I am standing, I am standing." No one takes any notice. Why should they? They've never heard of this Westminster ritual. In Westminster, when the Speaker says, "I am standing," when the Speaker stands up, even the Prime Minister sits down. So these things do not exist here. That doesn't mean that governance doesn't exist or needn't exist. We have foisted an imported system on a very different, I won't say ignorant, but a very differently attuned cultural mass. Now, I'm reading an excellent book on migration by a man called Devesh Kapoor, and I came across a sentence there, which I'll read out to you. And why I read this out is because the mass is what matters. That's the discrete, ultimate reality of India. Devesh Kapoor says, elite migration has lubricated the political ascendancy of India's numerically dominant lower castes. So consider that. Elite migration. All your IIT graduates, your bankers go off to the United States. And the numerically dominant lower castes rise up to take their place. And they are not attuned to the Westminster tradition of Parliament. So they rule in their own way. Perhaps you should give them panchayats. And this is so everywhere. I'll end with drawing an analogy near home, this club. This club was modeled on the great gentlemen's clubs of London, the Athenaeum, the Travellers, the Carlton. When I was first brought to this club, it was out in Chowrangi. I had just come back from England by my editor for lunch in 1960. It was a very, very different institution. It looked and felt exactly like the Athenaeum or the Carlton or the Travellers. Now it doesn't any longer. During the 20 years that I was a member of the National Liberal Club in London, there was never a single election. Why? If there were 6 vacancies on the committee, the secretary sounded members and he found 6 winning candidates to take their place. That is how they do things in British gentlemen's clubs. I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying we tried to emulate it here and we didn't. Now this club is a place of fun and festivity, festivals. My mobile rings with SMSs all the time, buzzes. Something new is happening in the club. 2 drinks for the price of 1, a new restaurant, some dish here, another dish there. Members' nostalgia, members are invited to sing and dance for the delectation of others. Well, that's all very good. This is a jolly and jovial place now. But it is an Indian place. It will get more jolly and more jovial, and it will become more Indian. That is how we adapt, we assimilate, we absorb foreign institutions, and we've done that to Parliament. So don't get too disheartened when you see the rowdy scenes in Parliament. That's how things happen in a puja pandal. That's how things happen in the para groups. And that's how Indians do things. And that's how Indians will do things more and more. Thank you.
Just as we were coming into this room, I was telling Mrs. Dottorai that Shunanda Dottorai, who's actually a very close relative of mine, I call him Khokon Mama. I was telling her that Khokon Mama and I tend to get paired very often in these kinds of panel discussions, and to my advantage, I dare say, because most of the things I want to say are said by him before I have a turn to speak. So you will pardon me if you hear a nephew-in-law repeating what his uncle-in-law has already said. As you heard from Shyamul Datta, again I repeat what a previous speaker has said, that Indian democracy or democracy in India, there's a distinction between the two, as you probably did make out when Shunanda Datta was speaking. Democracy in India was born under the star of fragility. There was a great deal of skepticism about whether it would survive, whether it would at all function. But since 1952 or 1950, when the Constitution came into place, democracy, despite its many weaknesses, its many shortcomings, has proved to be robust. It muddles along, if one can take a cue from Mr. Datta. But the institutions are in place. Despite the 18 months of the emergency, democracy functions in India. This is not to say that there are no challenges to Indian democracy. The other thing that has happened, and this is one of the challenges that's coming to democracy in India, is that the sense of empowerment, the sense of democratic rights has deepened within the Indian population. This is one reason why groups of people, sections of society, who were previously not parts of any democratic process, have now become parts of what we call the Westminster model parliamentary democracy. They are not familiar with the rules, the conventions that operate or make these institutions operational. Hence, the disruption of Parliament, which is just one illustration of the process that I am talking about. This is one challenge that Indian democracy faces. It adjusts, absorbs, it muddles along, but it doesn't quite know how to resolve this tension of the empowerment of people and the Westminster model, which the people do not quite know or understand. But there is a more fundamental challenge. The source is the same. This challenge comes from the phenomena of more and more people, sometimes led by self-styled politicians or even godmen, who take to the streets, who ignore constitutional methods of decision making. Sometimes even politicians do it through fasts, through protests in streets, rallies, demonstrations, and so on, and of course violence. Summing up the sessions of the Constituent Assembly in 1949, in the very last speech that he gave to that august body, Ambedkar warned about this tendency. He said, now that we have become a republic and a democracy, we must abjure this path of non-constitutional or unconstitutional ways of decision making. He said to stay on that path is to write the grammar of anarchy. I think the phrase is telling, the grammar of anarchy. I'm afraid the challenge to Indian democracy that comes from this quarter is the challenge of anarchy. We are facing more and more movements, protests, violence that do not respect, completely ignore constitutional methods. Therefore, democracy, debate, discussion, they die. This is one kind of challenge. I would say a challenge from below, rooted to a sense of empowerment among the people who are not previously familiar or haven't been educated in what is parliamentary government. But there's another kind of threat, more perceptible. This is a threat from the top, coming from people who should be or who are educated in parliamentary methods and know how a Westminster style of government should function. I'll take 3 examples and deal with them very quickly to illustrate the point I'm making. A few years ago, all of you will remember, there was what has come to be known as the famous Neera Radia case. We were all upset, outraged at what seemed to be lobbying on part of a public relations expert on behalf of eminent industrialists, talking to journalists, politicians, and so on and so forth. Such was our sense of outrage that we completely forgot what was the source of this information. The source of this information was the tapping by the government of a private individual's telephone. Neera Radia might be the most horrible human being one can think of, but in a democracy, she has the right to her privacy. But that privacy was transgressed, was violated by the government when, without her consent, they tapped her phone. She could have been involved in financial shenanigans. I'm sure she was. But there are other ways of dealing with that. If she was not paying her income tax, there was some way of dealing. The income tax department deals with such issues every day without violating her privacy. This is the point I'm trying to make. In a democracy, there is a clear distinction between privacy, what is private to an individual, and what is public. And the privacy of an individual is sacred. Point second, around the same time, the writer Arundhati Roy was charged with sedition because the state believed what she had written was quote unquote anti-national. Nowhere was it defined what is anti-national. Does it mean reflecting the opinions of the state, of the government in power? Any individual has the right in a democracy to express his or her views. And to charge somebody with sedition, a law that goes back to British autocracy when it ruled India and denied Indians citizenship, a law against which Gandhi launched the Rowlatt Satyagraha. And we as a proud republic upheld that law against a writer because she had expressed views that were unpalatable or unacceptable to people in government. Even a person whose views are unacceptable to the government has a right to express his or her views. That's the litmus test of democracy. I disagree with every single word that you say, but I'll defend with my life your right to say it. Voltaire. I take this as the litmus test of democracy. Amartya Sen wrote in the Argumentative Indian, it's not just the institutions and the way they function that ensure or guarantee democracy. It's the divergence of views, it's the expression of dissent that a society permits that shows how democratic that society actually is. Finally, the example, the end of 2010, a doctor called Vinayak Sen was arrested and denied bail. The charge was he had in his possession Maoist literature. If a copy of having a Das Kapital in your library, a Bhagavad Gita in your library, the collected works of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi in your library, a copy of Tagore's Religion of Man in your library is not a crime, why is possessing the red book by Mao Zedong a crime? Why should he be denied bail, and before that, why should he be arrested? These are examples of how the rights, democratic rights of individuals are being eroded in our country by the state, which actually should preserve, maintain, and guarantee the democratic rights of individuals. India will not be a full-fledged democracy as long as individuals get into trouble for speaking their minds. As long as the mind of Indians are not without fear. And that brings the second part of that Tagore quote, brings out another aspect, another challenge to Indian democracy. The head held high. There are millions of people in India who, because they do not have proper nourishment, do not have proper housing, do not have proper health care and access to education, they cannot hold their head high. They cannot live with dignity. As long as that continues, Indian democracy will be perpetually at crossroads, a promise that has never been fulfilled. Thank you.
Dr. Mukherjee has highlighted some of the very important facets of democracy. Now we would be interested to hear Mr. Dinesh Trivedi from his practical experience in the field of politics, as also from his experience in, in different other walks of, but I shall request him to confine to the subject.
Mr. Moderator, and good evening everybody. You know, I was recently in Canada just to enjoy my freedom. Canada just happened to be a place. It's not that just to express your freedom you have to go to Canada or USA. It just happened to be Canada because I had to go en route for my son's graduation, so I went for his graduation. I went to Canada. And it was a very interesting incident which I am going to narrate. We sat in a taxi and there is a beautiful garden there in Victoria. It's a world famous garden and it took 40 minutes to reach. So obviously interested in public life, Mr. Moderator, I asked Alan, who drove us there. I said, tell me, Alan, what do you think about the politicians in Canada? So he said, same as everywhere else. And I made a mistake or asking him a supplementary question, saying, what do you mean same as everywhere else? He said, scoundrels. And my family and my friends who were sitting in the taxi had a hearty laugh. Because obviously Alan did not know that I belong to the same fraternity of scoundrels. Well, I must thank you very much for having me here. Today you are not a barrister, you are a judge, Your Honor. I must have a caveat before I begin. And the caveat is, whatever I speak here, I speak as an individual, neither as a party member, if I have a party, nor as a member of parliament. I rather speak as a citizen of India, which I am very proud. And this is where Alan told me the second thing. And that second thing is more important. When our friends laughed, he said, but mind you, we make sure that these politicians do work. We don't leave them alone even for a minute. It is because of us these guys are sitting wherever they are sitting. And we make sure they work. And this exactly defines perhaps what democracy is all about. And Abraham Lincoln or all the forefathers gave us the essence of democracy: for the people, of the people, by the people. The center focal point is, Mr. Moderator, people. And it was very nice to hear from Mr. Sunanda Dattare that whether it is Ambani, Mukesh Ambani, or a common man, the value of their vote is the same. That is the theoretical part of democracy, which is working very well once in 5 years, or I don't know when. But Mukesh Ambani lives with a separate set of laws. But that common man you just mentioned about, he has different set of laws. What I am talking about is the rule of law. What I thought that the value of their vote is the same. Once in 5 years he also goes to vote, and the common man also goes to vote. The value of their vote is the same. But thereafter, the value system changes. And that is where I think we are really at the crossroad. The focal point in any democracy is always the people. And that is where the two very important words are character, and value comes out of character, and discipline. Teamwork comes out of discipline. If you have value, then you have character, and if you have character, you have commitment. And those who come to public life, there has to be unquestionable commitment towards the country, the nation. The nation has to come first. And if you want to work in a setup, in a society, in a parliament, in a committee, you have got to respect the team. There is a place for individual as far as expressing himself or herself. But here, unfortunately, for the people, by the people, of the people, it has gone down to of the party, for the party, and by the party. And I am not talking about any individual party. I am talking about collectively. Look at any party. I would have liked, even if it was a corporate structure, that there is a board and then the board members decide, and you know there is a core group. But here it has become a proprietorship. And everything depends on an individual. There is no setup of decision-making process. That is what worries me. You look at, we are going to have the first citizen of India. His Excellency, the President of India, is going to be elected in about a month's time. Do we know who that person is going to be? 1.2 billion people. That gentleman or that gentle lady is going to represent 1.2 billion people. And if we are talking about participative democracy, in theory, this democracy is fantastic. And I can tell you it is because of this democracy we are very proud of, because Indian mind, I can guarantee you, cannot work without democracy. There could be ups and downs, But then we have just no idea where is the participation of the person. You may say that, well, the American system of direct election of a president is different. Then the election of our president, he's a figurehead. Mind you, he is no figurehead. The amount of authority the President of India has by constitution, which Mr. Moderator would know much better than I would imagine, is tremendous. And you mean to say the country has no right to know what are his views on education? What are her views on healthcare, HIV? What are her views on religion fundamentalism? Do you think the country has a right to know? And what is so great about it that why can't we discuss? Unless and until discussions are taken into public domain, I don't think so we can have a functioning democracy. And that is where, Mr. Moderator, my pain and my worry of this crossroad. And in this crossroad, when you are very nicely, you explain, Mr. Ray, how you have to cross the road. Maybe it's good for your health because you take 4 chakkars and then you go to your destination. But you can be hit also, unfortunately, God forbid. But that is the essence. 1/3 of the country under extreme left, call it Naxalite, call it Mao, call it by any name. And I have a question which was asked in Parliament. I don't want to bore you by giving all the details and reading out of it. But the essence of it was given in depth that 182 districts today are under almost perhaps the rule of not democracy, of extreme left wing. 1/3 of member of parliament today have hardcore criminal record. The problem is what? I was just reading the Constitutional Assembly debate, Mr. Moderator, and I tell you, it's like, you know, you feel so excited. This is India. And the kind of people, just for the benefit of this august house, which are much more intelligent than I am, and the panelist who definitely knows much more than I do, but just to refresh the memory that what kind of people we had. We had Mr. Rajagopalachari, Gopalaswamy Iyengar, we had Sajiva Reddy, we had V. Subramaniam, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, K. Munshi, Sarat Chandra Bose, B.R. Ambedkar, Kriplani, Pandit Govind Vallam Pant, Jawaharlal Nehru, Rafi Ahmed Kidwai, Rajendra Prasad, Sarojini Naidu. I can go through the list. Each one of them had total commitment towards the country. You have set a very tall order of punctuality, and members of parliament, you know, they keep on speaking, and you don't have a hammer to hit on my head. That's why I've kept my watch. I still have 7 minutes. And I will just take a minute of yours and read from the Constituent Assembly debate what Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan had to say. Normally I don't read. I read once in Parliament. That was during the presentation of the budget. And you saw the result. I'm scared of reading. Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan says, suicide is the greatest sin, to commit suicide. To murder yourself, to betray yourself, to barter away your spiritual wealth for the mess of pottage, to try to preserve your body at the expense of your spirit. That is the greatest sin. We therefore stand out for the great ideal for which this country has stood. The ideal which has survived the assaults of invaders. The ideals to which the the unheeding world today is turning its attention to India. we are able to do it. The flame which has sustained us in overcoming foreign rule will fire our efforts to build a united and a free India. Now this is the dream which the forefather of our constitution had. Now this is where I just want to tell that where is the dream gone? I have with me Vora committee report. Your blood will boil. And if it doesn't boil, then there is no blood left in there. Vora committee report, I'm sure everybody knows about it. Nexus of criminals, bureaucrats, police, politicians, and legal fraternity also. Everybody included. Media too. So all the pillars of democracy included. And what does the Vora committee, which had DRI, DIB, CBI, RAW, customs, revenue intelligence, everybody was there, part of it. And it is documented. And it says that the country has been taken over by mafia by running a parallel government. The official machinery has been pushed to irrelevance. I stood up in the parliament and I know that for 2 days parliament was adjourned. I said there has to be a debate on this because of future of democracy. This was in early 90s. I said the future of democracy depends on this report. We must take it head on. I said when I stand up here, the people of the country don't know whether it's Honorable Dinesh Trivedi speaking or Mafia Dinesh Trivedi speaking. Najma Heptullah ji was on the chair and she said that, sorry, I cannot do this. I cannot allow you to speak. I said, Madam, I'm sorry, when you stand up there, and I wanted to provoke her a little. I said, when you stand up there, people do not know whether it is Honorable Najma Heptullah or Mafia Najma Heptullah. She got so annoyed, I will never come to this house unless you apologize, and a lot of things happened. I said, but Vora committee doesn't say except Dinesh Trivedi and Najma Heptullah. I went to the Supreme Court with that famous case, and right to information was a fallout of it. So this is where my worry is, that there are a lot of criminals. Money has become the most important thing today in politics. It all starts with elections. And mind you, no matter which party, I'm telling you with a lot of responsibility and a lot of experience to it. The money doesn't come from corporate houses. They don't have such money. Even if they are paying money, it comes by check. The real money comes actually, most of it, from people who do not follow law and the rule of law. Once they patronize a party, which is most of the party, they have their pound of flesh. And it is that lobby today. And if you see the Rajya Sabha or you even Lok Sabha, people want to spend, I was told in Andhra Pradesh they spend about 20 crores for fight the election. They must be noble people to spend 20 crores to serve the country. And that is what, Mr. Moderator, worries me a lot. And in conclusion, I will also refer again to the Constitutional Assembly debate. Pandit Nehru said it very well, that it is the spirit of this constitution and not a piece of law. Words can create magic, but sometimes words cannot even express and explain the spirit of democracy. That spirit of democracy is what Indian constitution should follow, and this is where India will shine as long as that spirit of democracy is there. And I am very sorry to say, Mr. Moderator, it is that spirit of democracy which worries me. It is not the ethos of democracy, and I am very much certain that given this enlightenment of people will not take it lying down. We move very slowly. We are peace-loving people, which is a great thing in democracy. But I dare say there is a churning going on, And this set of values are not going to last long, because this set of values, when they say value-based politics, the value is in the basement. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
With Mr. Dinesh Trivedi's submission. Now, his pointed reference to the degeneration of Indian politics in the functioning of democracy is extremely, I should say, forthright and bold. I just can't resist the temptation of reading out to you what Mr. Nani Palkiwala wrote in his dedication of his book, We the People. I am reading it out because it really reflects what Mr. Trivedi has said. He dedicated the people to my countrymen, and this is quote unquote, to my countrymen who gave unto themselves the constitution but not the ability to keep it, who inherited a resplendent heritage but not the wisdom to cherish it, who suffer and endure in patience without the perception of their potential. This was spoken in 1984. Mr. Trivedi has said, and rightly so, that perhaps this quotation can be still given with justification in 2012. In addition, what he has said in his submission before you is this, that in theory, the democracy that is to be practiced in India is fantastic. But the people in practice do not enjoy the benefits of this. He has given a rather bleak picture, as is presently prevailing, that mafia is running a parallel government. But what was most encouraging from him, a person who is deeply imbibed in politics, he ended his speech with an encouraging note. And that is what we shall look forward to it. Perhaps in my lifetime, I will not be able to see the actual fruition of this. But I am sure that my children, your children, my grandchildren and your grandchildren will see better days. And that is what Mr. Trivedi has promised. That is why I thank him for that. Mr. Rudrangshu Mukherjee also started off in an encouraging note. The democracy in our country has been proved to be robust. Institutions are all in place. But he condemned the unconstitutional method of voicing protest by the general mass. He condemned this tendency to voice protest by holding demonstration, by destroying public property, by closing down the city or the country at a particular point of time. I am sure that he was perhaps had in mind the Anna Hazare's protest that he has lodged. Now, we must realize one thing, that civil society has become increasingly demanding and very much assertive. And Anna Hazare's movement is just an example of it. But the very vital question Mr. Mukherjee has raised is this, that granting that such a movement is necessary for the purpose of putting the persons in power in position to make them aware of the realities of the situation, should it be held in the way that has been held in public? For example, Mr. Anna Hazare has said publicly that a politician who is corrupt, he should be slapped in public. Now Mr. Mukherjee does not approve of this. He said, yes, you can protest. You can raise your voice if you find that anything wrong is being done by the people who you have elected. But that is not the way it is to be done. He has gone further and said that the persons at the top have also deviated from their line. He has given the examples of tapping of telephone. Privacy was transgressed. He has also given the example of the state trumping up charges against its citizen if his or her views are not acceptable to the persons in power. His contention had been that the litmus test of democracy is to allow expression of dissent. He has given the examples of Dr. Vinayak Sen arresting for possessing Maoist literature. Of course, these are totally unacceptable in any civilized society, and he has pointed out. And he has said that the democracy has to, if the democracy has to be put on the track, these are the aberrations which will have to be, one have to get rid of. I should say the fallibility on the part of the persons who we have elected to the parliament. An example was given, on the press it was flashed, that a lone union minister, I think Mr. Trivedi will be able to highlight this, that a lone minister was sitting on the empty treasury benches during 0 hour in the parliament. The consulting editor of the Statesman, Ms. Sima Mustafa, had rightly commented that the image of a lone minister occupying the treasury benches, it is not just regrettable, but a sign of danger to Indian democracy. Persons who we have elected to the parliament to espouse our cause, there we find a total neglect on the part of the elected legislators not to even sit in the parliament when the parliament is in session. And this is being shown on television. Mr. Shunanda Dattorai, he has rightly pointed out that the vote of Mukesh Ambani is not the same as a vote of a poor man in the street. And he has given the reasons why. This lack of equality, this practice of discrimination in all social institutions, this has become endemic in the running of Indian democracy. Imported trappings of democracy borrowed from the West is not going to work here. We will have to have a localized version of democracy, considering the education of the people, considering the different types of people who are there in the society, caste, color, different. Because India is a country with a vast magnitude of people of different types. Now it is bound to be different from a democracy practiced in the States or democracy practiced in the United Kingdom. But what Mr. Dattorai has emphasized is this, that give it a local version, bring it up and make it applicable to the Indian situation. Nothing wrong with the principle of democracy, but you have it practiced in the way it should be done. Now this is what I have understood the learned panelists speaking and delivering speeches before you.
But as I said, that it's not civil society, it's uncivil society. And there is an attempt to appropriate the functions of Parliament because there is a lobby which has lost faith in the legislative assemblies, in the institutions of state. I would not go so far as to say that there is a public lack of confidence in the institutions of state. I would say that there are interested lobbies with vested interests who are being manipulated by people and in a political
in a polity there are bound to be various focuses of interest, to operate this way because they cannot operate through parliament. This is not the first time we have seen it. Jayaprakash Narayan's movement from state to state was entirely extra-parliamentary. Even earlier, the Quit India movement, Mr. Moderator, there was a barrister in this city whom you may well know, Pesi Jinwala, whose father was in politics. He left politics when Gandhi called the Quit India movement. And Sir Padamji Jinwala said in a note that this will lead to anarchy. And it did. The slogan, Sarkar ke maal pani mein dal, that was part of the Quit India movement, still rules the masses today. Government property is destroyed as a sign of protest. So there has been this anarchical lumpen element in India all along, and they're just taking advantage of a cause. Now, corruption is a cause that can be capitalized. I'm not saying that there is no justice on the side of these movements, but they have always sprung up when people can't achieve their ends. The ends may be entirely justifiable through the legislative process.
Functioning of Parliament. I remember in 1990, when I became a member of Parliament for the first time, even a single MP walking out was a big news. And what is the news today? Oh, today Parliament functioned. Now what happens if your institutions don't function? And I have got a list with me. The corruptions from the year 1948 till today is unbelievable. Enormous number and figures. Nothing is less than 1 lakh crore. In 1948, 5 lakh crore was corruption. When you have a threat of CBI and just takes you without any rhyme or reason, just because you did not agree with your political party, then there is suppression. And I would any day have thousands of civil societies, rather than even if one person is suppressed. The value of democracy is even for one person. Unfortunately, I am sorry to say, we are in our very comfort zones. We appreciate good work. We always give shabashis to people who have done good work, but we don't stand by that person. And I am not talking about my individual self. I have had great compliments from the entire country. I am very grateful. When Mr. Moderator, you talked about fiery and all, I was very conscious that I am not going to touch anything related to me personally, because that is not what I have come here for. People know what has happened and all. But yes, civil society is absolutely part of it, whether it is Baba Ramdev, whether it is Anna Hazare. The fact is people are going to them. If there is a vacuum, this parallel system is going to come. And a parallel system run by underworld mafia is any day worse than perhaps Anna Hazare.
Like many things in India, the term civil society is also misused. There is more to civil society than an ex-army truck driver and a hirsute godman. Universities, the various cultural institutions, media, clubs like this are also institutions of civil society. And members of those civil society every 5 years go out and elect their representatives to parliament. Those elected representatives have the responsibility of drafting a bill or any piece of legislation, like the Lokpal bill. If they fail to do so, and nobody has set them the agenda to pass the Lokpal bill or to enact it before Anna Hazare and Baba Ramdev started their agitation. The fact that the political class succumbed to this lot speaks of their weakness. It doesn't speak of the triumph of civil society. In fact, it shows how the political class is also complicit in scripting the grammar of anarchy.
I think everybody really knows exactly what needs to be done. And You know, in every stage of our life, we quote Rabindranath Tagore. But his one, even if we do not, we are not a Pandit. But I have just taken one, and everybody also repeats that. It's not enough to repeat, you have to practice that. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. Here the mind is full of fear and the head is in the gutter. As long as I have my general secretaryship, as long as I am retained as a minister, as long as I get a ticket to fight the corporation election, this is where the problem is. And there is too many skeleton in people's cupboard. That is why they cannot, I'm talking in general, nothing to do with this audience here. And the poor people are too poor. They are very patriotic. I must tell you, a rickshawala is a very patriotic guy. But they are too poor. They don't even have money to go and do the x-ray if they have a fracture. And I can tell you, we are in a mess as far as health and education is concerned. Mess is the word. In America, perhaps the presidential election would be fought on education and health. But unfortunately, we are still toying with caste, creed, color, religion, region also. Region is now another addition. With this kind of complexity, I'm sorry, it's going to be difficult, but again, I go back to Nani Palkhiwala. Way back in 80s, he had given 4 different things that what a citizen could do. And that is where, in a sense, he just mentioned. He says the first thing, the time has come when citizens must wrest the initiative from professional politicians and from political parties and insist upon men of knowledge. That is the first thing he said. And then he goes, I don't want to repeat that. But the problem here, I am not much bothered about the financial corruption. My worry is the intellectual corruption. That we have a lot of people who are highly educated in the seat of power. But the choice in front of them is to look after the country's interests or to make sure the government survives. And for them the choice is very easy. That governments must survive. I have to take a decision. There is no courage of conviction, whether it is for reform or for whether it is any kind of such thing which as simple as perhaps passing a law. That is where I personally feel people have to get together. And again, Nani Palkhiwala, when he talks about 4 things, I have just said 1. Second, he says there is a deep felt need for an intelligent and educated organization of voters. I do not know whether that's feasible or not. Thirdly, we must shed the divisive tendency. Basically, everybody knows what is to be done. But you have to gather the courage. And I am too a small, insignificant person to really tell you what needs to be done. But certainly I'll tell you, something definitely needs to be done as long as it is peaceful, as long as it is democratic. These are the 2 main things. Thank you.
I think we have to distinguish, even though this is an academic distinction, for the purposes of discussion, we have to make the distinction between the institutions of democracy that are in place and the way those institutions are made to operate or are hindered from functioning. I think on the first issue, that there are democratic institutions in the country, there can be very little dispute that these institutions are indeed in place and have been in place since the Constitution was drafted and the Republic was born. How it functions, whether there are hindrances in its functioning, that is a very, very big question. And that is why we are here today. That is why we pose the question that democracy is indeed at crossroads. Threat of anarchy looms very large on large parts of the country. There is no way also of denying this. there are these contradictions and tensions working within Indian polity. My only submission is that the resolution of this conflict must also take place through democratic means and by no other.
You know, in a democracy, when you talk about institutions, and I can tell you with a lot of responsibility, I doubted whether institutions are in place. Today, institutions are working for the government of the day. How many of us who can really otherwise afford, we are people with education, we have got influence, how many of us would really go to a police station to register a FIR, even if there is something wrong has happened? How much faith and trust do we have on the police? I, as a member of parliament, I don't have. I do not have trust in the police because the police works for the government and for the party. It does not work for the citizens, number one. Bureaucracy, again, works for the party, and the party is owned by the individual. Who has got faith and trust in these kind of institutions? That doesn't mean the police is bad, no. That doesn't mean the bureaucrats are bad, no. But the system has become so rotten that if you do your duty very well, then you could be sacked or you could be transferred. If this is what democracy is, then I agree with General Saab that anarchy is not only looming large, but I may not be far from the reality that it has already arrived. It is only the degree of anarchy. If your CBI, if your bureaucracy, and if your, the moment the government changes, everything changes. Why? There has to be a national policy. There has to be a national policy on rivers, on roads, on railways. You cannot change the policy by change of a government or a change of an individual minister. If this is not anarchy, then what it is? Where is the rule of law? And wherever there is no rule of law, I am afraid there is anarchy. It is not looming large, it's already knocking at the door.
Particularly to General Mukherjee's question, a crowd stopped him on the road. Now he sees that as absence of democracy. I would say it's an excess of democracy. People are exercising their rights, as they would say, to stop cars, to stop military men in their limousines. Those people don't have cars. They are pedestrians, and they see it as part of their political birthright. Now, what you really want, General Mukherjee, and what most people want, is an orderly society. You want not just good governance, you want law and order enforced from above. You don't want democracy, you don't want a sharing, you don't want the rickshawala and the thelawala to have equal decision-making powers with the army generals and the civil servants, but you want the army generals and the civil servants to impose law and order on society. And that reminds me of a comparison Moynihan, the former American ambassador here, drew between three cities, Calcutta, Rangoon, and Singapore. And he said he saw them all at one time, and then he saw them again 20 years later. And he said Calcutta had too much freedom, and look what's happened to it. It's an enormous slum. And Singapore had too little of it, and what has happened to it. It's a developed world where you can buy, and he said abalone is in public housing. Now, do you want that? If you want that, then you won't have any kind of obstruction on the road, and you won't have street corner meetings, but you'll have good governance and you have good order. I'm not finding fault with it. But you can't want full democracy and law and order at the same time. It just doesn't happen in a nation country.
The only thing that I would like to show, like to say, is if you take your mind back about 5 years from today, 5-6 years ago, there was exactly the similar sort of situation. At 10 o'clock in the morning, when people had been rushing to their offices and to their places of employment, there had been a tremendous jam because teeming millions from the villages, they came down to Calcutta and completely stalled the entire city. At that time, one of the judges of a high court, in order to impose the law and order, he sent for the commissioner of police. He formulated certain things, saying that if you want to have procession, you must be sticking to the left-hand side of the road, and you should not come onto the middle of the road and stop the traffic. The traffic must be allowed to go. They should be stopped by the police from time to time so as to allow the traffic to pass and all that. And you remember what happened? The political party in power at that time took up the matter and staged a dharna in front of the court and in front of the residence of the judge concerned. So much so. And you remember the slogan that was given? Lala, Kolkata theke pala. You remember that? Now, in answer to your question, General Mukherjee, which is a very pertinent question, this also answers to Mr. Datta Rai. Yes, you practice democracy. You show your protest. But do not do anything which will destroy the law and order. Because as I said, if you destroy law and order, then that by necessary implication destroys democracy.
Well, all that remains for me is to thank our eminent panelists and this well-informed audience for having made this evening so innovating for all of us. First of all, Dr. Rudrangshu Mukherjee on my left, the Chief Editor of Telegraph, may I request you to kindly accept a little token of our appreciation, although you have one already, I think. A second one will do you no harm. This way. And Mrs. Ishani Datta to come and kindly present this. Thank you very much, Dr. Mukherjee. May I now request Mrs. Roy Chaudhary to kindly present a memento of Senas to the moderator of this entire session. I think he moderated it wonderfully and a little very deftly too.
But the moderator should come last.
No, not at all, sir. We are going in by one line.
Army thing.
Honorable MP Dinesh Trivedi. I think he gave us a lot of insight as to what is really happening in the parliament, although we may perhaps be knowing a bit from the newspaper reports and all, but I think there was a lot of insight to it, specifically the example of Mafia, Mrs. Najma Haptullah. I think that was going very. May I request Mrs. Roma Bhagat to kindly give a memento to the Honorable MP, Mr. Dinesh Trivedi. Last but not the least, I cross Goriahat crossing virtually every second day. And I really know what democracy can really mean. Thank you very much for giving us that very nice example, Mr. Shananda Datta Rai. May I request Mrs. Julie Datta to kindly give away a memento to Mr. Shananda Datta Rai. For the audience, I really don't have any mementos, but I have a heartful of thanks to each one of you for having participated in this very well-informed discussion. At least I am going away a very highly educated person. And for that, I'll request all of you to join us for dinner and drinks immediately hereafter. Thank you very much. Give the audience a good clap.